Good morning, fifth grade. We are going to continue our discussion about medical treatment for soldiers during the Civil War. You have a different focus question. It says, what obstacles might you encounter if you were a soldier during the Civil War? How would you overcome them? Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the focus question. What point does the author make about medical treatment during the Civil War? How do the text features and details he chooses support this point? Our vocabulary words are the same from yesterday because we are going to be reading the same text in parallel teaching. So please review those, match the words to the pictures, and then turn the page. All right, the text we're reading today is on the back of your notes, so you can go ahead and tear it off. And the title of the text is called Injuries and Illnesses. And we know that this is about the Civil War because that is our unit of study. And so we need to come up with a how or why question about injuries and illnesses during the Civil War. So I said, and you can write this down in the first part of box 1, how did injuries and illnesses affect soldiers during the Civil War? Press pause to write down your answer and play when you are ready to read. And as we're reading, we are going to underline evidence that answers this question. How did injuries and illnesses affect soldiers during the Civil War? All right, medical treatment during the Civil War was not the same as it is today. Today, many soldiers survive, even with wounds that are very bad. During the days of the Civil War, something as simple as a scratch could kill you. There were doctors during the Civil War, but they didn't have as much to work with as doctors have today. Penicillin had not been invented yet. Many medical students got 2 years training or less. Excuse me. If an injured soldier could not get up and walk, he would have to wait for someone to come get him on a stretcher. Some of the stretchers were very heavy. Some could weigh more than 20 pounds. The injured soldier would be taken to a battlefield hospital. This hospital would be near where the battle was taking place. In the battlefield hospital, things were very bad. There were ether and chloroform during the Civil War. These could be used to put a patient to sleep. These usually weren't available in a battlefield hospital. The favorite drug of choice was whiskey. Some men were given a bullet or told to bite down. This was true even during amputations. Amputations were one of the worst treatments there were, but they were very common. About 29,000 men in the Union Army had some part of their bodies amputated. 7,000 of these men died. The bigger the limb that was amputated, the better the chance a soldier had of dying. More than half of all men who lost a leg would die. They would either die during the surgery or an infection later. Infection was very common during the Civil War. The tools that doctors used were not cleaned well between patients. A doctor may have wiped a tool clean with only a towel and then moved on to the next patient. The rank a soldier had did not make a difference in his treatment. General Stonewall Jackson, a popular leader in the Southern Army, was accidentally shot by men in his own army. He was taken to a field hospital where one of his arms was amputated. He died days later. Doctors would often use amputations even if the wound wasn't that bad. Amputation was often faster and easier to do than simply treating a wound. Some doctors did so many amputations that it took less than 2 minutes to remove an arm or leg from a soldier. Disease was also very bad during the Civil War. In the Union Army, 60% of the deaths were caused by disease. The soldiers caught many different diseases. Some soldiers had lived in the country their whole life. They had never been exposed to some diseases like measles. This made it easier for them to catch the disease and die from it. Many of the Union Army would get sick from bad food or drinking bad water. This also killed many men. Regular soldiers would do better. They had been trained not to drink from certain rivers. They also knew what food to stay away from. Men who volunteered for the Army did not have this training. The South had problems that the North did not have. The North had used its ships to set up a blockade during the war. The South could not get supplies. The medicine began to run out. At one point, there was a pamphlet being passed around the South. This pamphlet listed different plants and herbs that could be used in place of certain medicines. Many men in the South got malaria. Mosquitoes caused this. At the time, people in the South did not know this. Many men slept outside at night without netting to protect them. This made it very easy to get bitten by a mosquito. After the Civil War, medical care kept improving. Doctors began to understand that things must be kept clean in order to keep more people from getting sick and dying. But during the Civil War, getting sick and hurt could be deadly. All right, so if I'm thinking about my main idea, I want to know how injuries and illnesses affected soldiers. I know that it was very easy for them to die if they did get an injury or illness, because it says a scratch could kill you, the hospitals were bad, amputations were terrible and led to death, infection was common, disease was common, and it tells us in the text that all these things could be deadly. So for my main idea, I would write, the injuries and illnesses negatively affected soldiers because they died of amputations, infections, and disease. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for 2A. It says, how was medical knowledge and training different during the Civil War? And if we look back in our in this first column, we know that doctors, they didn't have the supplies back then that they had today, and they didn't get as much training. So we would write in 2A, doctors during the Civil War did not have as many effective medicines, and they only received 2 or less years of medical training. For 2B, press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for 2B. How might amputations affect soldiers? If we go back into these last 2 paragraphs in the first column, it talks about how amputations are bad and many of the soldiers died, either from surgery or infection. And so in 2B, we would write amputations affected soldiers by being painful and increasing the soldier's chance of death. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for number 3. Why was infection common for wounded soldiers? And if we go back up to the first paragraph in the second column, it talks about how the doctors did not clean their tools in between patients. And so in 3A, we would write infection was common for wounded soldiers because the tools that doctors used were not cleaned well between patients. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for 3B. Why might unclean tools lead to infection? And so we're going to have to make an inference here because our text doesn't come right out and say it, but we know that unclean tools would lead to infection because dirty tools spread germs from patient to patient. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for 4A. What obstacles did the South have that the North did not during the war? And if we go down to this 6th paragraph in the second column, it talks about how the North used blockades during the Civil War, and that kept the South from getting the supplies that they needed. And so in 4A, we would say the South could not get supplies because of the blockades from the North. Therefore, the Southern soldiers could not get food and medicine. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for 4B. How did the South attempt to overcome these obstacles? And if we go back into that paragraph, it talks about how they passed around a pamphlet that listed the different plants and herbs that could be used as medicine. So we would write the South passed out pamphlets that listed the different plants and herbs that could be used for certain medicines. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the paragraph. How did the lack of medical treatment affect soldiers? And you would go back to your main idea for the article, and then you have several other details for boxes 2, 3, and 4 that you could add to support your answer.